A reading from While the World Sleeps, Writings from the First 20 Years of the Global AIDS Plague, edited by Chris Bull, forwarded by Larry Kramer. This reading is From Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll, and AIDS by Iris Dela Cruz, from Women, AIDS, and Activism, 1990. I remember seeing the prostitutes on 3rd Avenue. I started getting high with them, and before long I was out there turning tricks. I thought it was great. I had enough money to take care of both my heroin habit and my child and to maintain an apartment on the East 14th Street. I walked to work by night. By this time, I was taking courses at the School for Visual Arts and shooting up before school in the bathroom. My daughter was attending daycare, which was affiliated with the Puerto Rican Socialist Party. Old habits die hard. And I thought I was doing all right. When I started hustling, most of the women were white. Nobody turned a trick for less than $25, and if you were picked up for loitering, they let you out in the morning. They even had a squad of cops known as the Pussy Posse to round up the whores. I thought I had it made. I liked the feeling of power having men honk their horns as I walked the streets. And the idea that these men thought I was pretty enough to pay me for sex was a big ego boost. This went on for years, with the drug habit increasing subtly. During this time, I started writing and got a job writing columns on drugs and sex for men's magazines. This was the mid-1970s, and drugs and discos were considered very chic. All the good parties had lines of coke on coffee tables, and sex clubs were making millions. The party continued. Same faces, different drugs. My drug usage escalated. I dropped out of college and sent my daughter to San Francisco to live with her father. I kept writing. My editor set up a meeting with a woman who was organizing prostitutes out of the West Coast, and she asked me if I was interested in reviving Pony, Prostitutes of New York. My best friend had just been found nude under the Brooklyn Bridge with her throat cut. We used to watch each other's backs out on the stroll. Hookers needed to be protected since it was obvious the police and government thought we were expendable. I became the spokesperson for Pony and did all kinds of interviews. The media had always been enthralled with articulate street people. I kept the ratings up. This went on for about a year while I spent more and more time in shooting galleries. Finally, the union started getting interested in prostitutes, and Pony started becoming enmeshed in politics. I walked away. A couple of years passed, and my drug habit became the only thing I was interested in. I lost my apartment, and basically lived in shooting galleries. I was still hustling, but the wait between tricks became longer and longer. I looked and acted like your basic run-of-the-mill junkie. I had amassed 26 arrests, 2 of them for second-degree assault. I had meant it when I had said that no one was ever going to beat me. I became real good with a knife and felt nothing cutting someone. I felt nothing anyway. If I called my daughter and had any feelings of love or regret came up, I would sedate myself. My life consisted of getting high. I was now addicted to heroin, methadone, sleeping pills, and tranquilizers, and turning tricks. Emotions were not something I wanted to deal with. I used to pray to die. I'd overdose almost every month and then raise hell when the hospital staff revived me. I tried getting into drug treatments, but they were overcrowded and had waiting lists. This was a very exciting time in my life. Too bad I wasn't there to experience it. I had a boyfriend I really did love. I just wasn't wild about myself. So there was someone to watch my back and get high with. But I was getting tired. There is nothing more pitiful than an old junkie whore. It was about this time I started noticing that a lot of my friends were getting sick and dying. When I had to be hospitalized for pelvic inflammatory disease, the rage kicked up again. I returned to the streets with a vengeance and became known as La Blanca Loca, the crazy white woman. I fought with everyone until, in a spaced out rage, I stabbed a man that tried to rip me off. I was given up. I was given 1.5 to 3 years. I kicked all the drugs in jail, complete with convulsions, vomiting, and diarrhea. I hated being locked up, and it occurred to me the main reason for people are locked away is because they're a threat either to themselves or to society. On drugs, I was both. I copped to a program after spending 8 months dealing with the insanity the New York State Department of Corrections is notorious for. It was time to start over. I stayed in treatment for about 9 months and learned some very important things, like how to channel my rage and loving support and encounter groups. I learned how to accept and give love, and I also learned why so many of my friends were dying. We started losing people in the program. The enemy finally had a name. It was AIDS. After I left treatment, I took a course and got my license as an emergency medical technician. I had been drug-free for some time and was making Narcotics Anonymous meetings, so I worked as an EMT with plans to someday go to medical school. After years of destructive behavior, I really felt I had to pay back for the very fact that I was still alive. I guess it's true what they say about the Lord protecting fools and children. So I worked and tried to ignore the little things that kept cropping up, such as the white stuff in my mouth and the fatigue. I used to transport AIDS patients a lot, since I was the only one that didn't give the dispatcher a hard time about it. By the time they were finding out that the disease wasn't airborne and it was only transmitted by bodily fluids. So I would wear gloves but refused to wear a mask or suit up to transport AIDS patients. ER nurses would run all kinds of guilt trips about what I was bringing home to my family. I once had a big fight with a charge nurse after I suctioned a patient in the ER with PCP. He was left for over an hour all congested. Medical staff on the whole resented AIDS patients. The feelings was that they were all faggots and dope fiends and deserved what they got. By this time, I knew what the signs and symptoms were. I knew I was positive for the AIDS virus. I was still working even though I was tired all the time. Finally, I had a patient go into cardiac arrest in the back of the ambulance. The man had a urinary obstruction and was semi-comatose. I panicked and started CPR without a mask. I found out later that he had active tuberculosis. A few weeks later, after working with soaring fevers, I was hospitalized. My temperature was spiking at 105.5 degrees, and the nurses were telling my mother to stay with me because I would not make it through the night. I was delirious and spoke with my father and grandmother. They both were dead, but I made it. I guess I'm too much of a bitch to die. I got out of the hospital 90 days later looking like the National AIDS poster child. I spent the next 10 months getting my weight and strength back. Locked in my mom's house, I felt like a germ, back to feeling ugly and unloved. I didn't want to be touched because I felt unclean. In this society, women's bodies are unclean and have to be deodorized before they're acceptable. So now, on top of everything, I was diseased. My mother wouldn't hear it. She kept hugging me despite the fact that I shied away, began attending a mother's group and forced me to go out. My first time on a train, I sat there looking at lovers and families and thinking that these options are closed to me. I would look at the person next to me and think, would they still sit next to me if they knew I had AIDS? I started attending a group for women with HIV. I felt like I was the only woman in the world with AIDS. It was all gay white men. This group changed that. All of a sudden, I discovered other women with the virus. They were black women, white women, Latinas, rich women, and poor women. They were addicts and transfusion women. They were mothers and sisters, lovers and daughters and grandmothers. Some were militant lesbians, and others were Republicans. Imagine that. Even Republicans get AIDS. And we were all connected by the virus. Outside, differences became trivial. Feelings and survival were everyone's main concern, and I learned that there was still a lot of love in me. The rage mellowed. I was diagnosed with AIDS 2 years ago. I kept attending the women's group until the leader left. Then I took over the facilitator's role along with my best friend, Helen, who has ARC. A few months ago I started a group for bi and sexuals dealing with HIV. I do AIDS outreach and education. I teach safer sex and show addicts how to clean their works. I encourage them to seek treatment. The rage that burned in me is now a hot anger. I've been to too many funerals with this disease. I'm tired of a newly diagnosed being made to feel dirty. I'm tired of my people being neglected and left dying on the streets. My child is now 18 and we're very close. The legacy I want to leave her with is for her to remember her mama was a survivor. She survived drugs. She survived her own worst enemy, which was herself, and she taught others survival. She may or may not have survived AIDS, but she kicked ass while she was here.